All right, welcome to Peace of Mind Radio Podcast. I am Brian Ramsey, and the only guy with me today is Chris Vaughn.
You had to bring in a real expert, right?
I did.
That's our story, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, we brought up the topic, and everybody's like, no, I'm good.
I don't want to talk about that.
I got something else going on. So anyway, Chris and I are the only ones here today. But it is actually a topic that he and I both are pretty passionate about. We mentioned it last week on the show. So if you didn't catch last week's show, we talked about how to position annuity when it comes to retirement. So it's a pretty interesting show. We had interesting conversation about it.
We did.
And so make sure you tune in or jump in and watch last week's show. But this week, we set up last week for this week. So this week, we are talking about estate planning. Now, this is a little bit different conversation, I think, because that's kind of the that's what we hear back anyway. We're not going to talk about the estate documents. That's typically what you find is when somebody starts talking about estate planning, they go, well, do you have a will? Do you have a power of attorney?
Right.
That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the different levels of estate planning.
Right.
So there's 3 different levels. That's kind of what we're talking about. We're going to walk through each one of them so to give you some input on what it's all about, what the objective is typically in each of those levels of estate planning. And then obviously all the documents play a role in all of them, except for when it comes to trust planning, there's 2 different trusts that we'll talk about. But other than that, that's kind of what we're talking about. So we're going to jump right in. And by the way, if you are listening to this and you're so early on, we did not do this, and I think any episode we've done so far. For those that are listening, our phone number is 502-200-5210, and you can email us at info@fwppartners.com. You can always go to the website and go to our contacts, and you'll be able to pull up any of our contacts, schedule time to meet with us, however you want to do that. You can do that as well. All right, so let's talk about 3 levels of estate planning.
All right.
So level 1 is basically super basic planning.
Entry level, absolutely.
Entry level planning, and we say that is typically what? What are we trying to do? What's the objective in level 1?
Well, there's a couple different parts to it, but the main thing is just to make sure that somebody has the ability to deal with whatever happens if something happens to you. We're not trying to protect assets and do all those types of things. We're just trying to get the right people in the right place. And I think probably the most overlooked part of this, and I'm stunned as I talk to younger clients that they haven't done this, is the guardianship portion of this. It's, if something happens to you and your spouse, what happens to the kids? So that's a big part of that level 1. Yeah.
So we say level 1 is exactly what Chris says, and there's no. This is not a technical term, by the way. Okay, this is just what we've come up with. It's basic probate planning. This is not probate avoidance, although you're trying to do the best you can to limit probate. But it really is going through and making sure you have beneficiaries on, all your accounts. Mm-hmm. That's one way to kind of help minimize the impact of probate. But typically, what we find in this type planning is that you have a will, which everybody should have a will. But you have the basic documents, powers of attorney, all that good stuff. Right. But the one asset that we typically find when someone does basic planning is that they're typically having to probate a house and a car.
Right.
A house and or a car. So some people, they get a little older, they sell their house and, they're living in assisted living. They may not have a house, but they may have a car. And then some people that are in assisted living don't have a house or a car. And then you don't have to worry about it at all. From that perspective, you don't have to worry about probate. However, what you want to do is make sure that you minimize probate best we can. Mm-hmm. So we're going to check all of our beneficiaries and make sure all the beneficiaries are correct, especially those assets that don't have a beneficiary assigned to it. As an example, checking savings, which we talk about all the time. Yeah. What we call is a non-qualified investment account, traditional brokerage account. Anything like that. Investment property is another one. Yeah. So you just want to make sure that you have some way to get a beneficiary on there. And when I say investment, I'm talking about, I was thinking more of like a REIT, real estate investment trust. But anyway, my mind went one place and I said something else. But anyway, so real estate is really the one piece that we find that has to be probated, only because you can't take your house and name a beneficiary on your house.
Right.
Can't add one. You can't add a TOD or a POD. We talk about that a lot. So really that's level 1 is just basic probate minimization.
Right.
That's really what we call it. Now, level 2.
Now we'll get into the fun stuff.
Yeah, level 2 is the strategy behind level 2 is that you are avoiding probate. Now, I will tell you, there's some arguments to say that you don't want to ultimately altogether avoid probate because there is still this 6-month window when you have to let creditors know that you passed away. And so there's something to be said for leaving something in probate until it's a car because that's very easy to do.
A car.
Yeah, just can be done online.
Yep.
But we say let's just make sure that we avoid probate altogether, and we'll deal with the other if we need to. But so level 2 is number 1, you're trying best we can to avoid probate,
Right.
and number 2, you're going to put some what I say bumpers on distributions of your assets. So we got some asset control. So that's level 2, probate avoidance and asset control.
And I think the biggest thing you hit on there was with the asset control. You see people all the time, well, I want this to happen. I want that to happen when I'm gone. You can't guarantee those things are going to happen with a will. You just can't. You can't control how funds are dispersed and over generations. You know, you can't make sure that grandchildren are going to get certain things with just a will. The only way you can do that is with a trust. So if asset control is important, that is the only option.
Yeah, so think of it this way. Literally was in a conversation on Saturday morning this past week, and we were talking about trust planning, the benefits behind trust planning. And by the way, that's a whole separate podcast. That's probably multiple podcasts.
Oh, yeah.
I'm a firm believer, as all these guys know, in trust planning. I don't think transitioning wealth from one generation to the next actually works well unless it's in a trust where you can put
with a trust.
And again,
absolutely.
The way I said it this weekend was trust planning is think of it as kind of it's like putting bumpers on it, and you can put as little bumpers as you want.
Right.
You can have no bumpers, or you can have a lot of bumpers.
Right.
So it just depends on. I kind of think of it as a bowling alley, right? So when you go bowling, sometimes you can throw bowling in no bumpers and it goes in the gutter, or you can put the little bumpers up and it kind of controls the ball or whatever. It's kind of almost that.
Yeah,
and
that's a good example.
Yeah, so you get, but with trust planning, it really answers 3 things. You determine who gets it, when they get it, and how they get it. Right? So that's really what you're trying to control. So if you've got a family, and I'm sure everybody's family's perfect, but if you do have a situation where there's somebody that maybe is not very good with money, or you want to make sure that assets are protected against the money leaving the family. And by the way, that's a whole conversation in itself, just making sure family stays within the family, what we call bloodline planning. That's not the conversation for today. That's a different day. But it all has to do with trust. As Chris said, transitioning wealth in a will, you just say who gets it.
Right.
You don't get to control how they get it, when they get it.
Correct.
Whether it's protected from creditors, protected against divorce, protected against a premature death. And by the way, if you ever want to know exactly how trust planning would work in a case where it wouldn't work or it didn't work, call me. I'm happy to walk you through it. Chris has seen it 1,000 times. But it's a real life scenario where a couple didn't do planning and it wound up being, I wouldn't say a total disaster, but
I'd say I would disagree. I think it is a total disaster because the people who had the wealth, right? The
Mom and Dad,
patriarch,
in that case.
the matriarch, it was important to them that money get to the grandchildren. And because of a series of different things that happened, it didn't get to the grandchildren.
That's right.
So to me, that is a complete catastrophe because their wishes were not honored.
Yeah, in fact, the money wound up going down a rabbit hole, but the money wound up going to a daughter-in-law who they didn't particularly like. They was like, okay, she's fine, but they didn't like really, really have a close relationship with her. So it wound up being,
and that's where Johnny the Pool Boy comes in.
That's where Johnny the Pool Boy comes in.
That's what makes that a great story.
It is, exactly. So again, level 1 is just basic planning. You're just making sure you have beneficiaries on all your accounts, and you're doing the best we can to avoid the impact of probate.
Right.
Can't avoid probate altogether. Well, in some cases you can, but not in level 1. Level 2 is using trust. Typically what we find is that's revolving around a revocable trust or revocable trust if you want to be fancy.
Revocable.
Yeah. But But it's around trust planning, and you got to make sure that and by the way, when you do level 2 trust planning, you can go to the best attorney in town, have your documents drawn up, and have the cleanest, best documents that anybody's ever seen. But unless you title assets properly,
it's useless.
It's
almost useless.
Well, I was
with the trust part. Yeah, it is.
I was trying to think of a better word than useless. No, I think that's a pretty good word because it really is that. But it really is all about getting your estate documents done and then working with your advisor or working with your whoever you trust to help you to make sure that all assets that you have get titled properly, the beneficiaries are correct, to make sure that everything would pool to that trust when you're no longer here.
Yeah.
Right? All right. So level 2, probate avoidance. And we can do that properly done. You can avoid probate altogether. Now, again, some arguments whether you do that, and we can debate that at another time. And number 2, it's about asset control. Who gets it, when they get it, how they get it. Right? All right.
Before you go on to level 3, something that I want to throw in on those first 2, there's a lot of people, they'll say, well, when should I do those? In my opinion, if you are out of the house and on your own, you ought to be looking at the level 1 stuff.
For sure.
Right? If you're no longer living with mom and dad, you're at level 1. I have had some pushback from people in the past when they talk about, well, I don't have enough money to do the level 2, to do a trust. Well, how much is enough?
Right.
I would argue if you have $1 and it's important to you that dollar, who, when, how, like you just said, then you have enough money to go through that process. Sorry, I interrupted. Go ahead. No,
you didn't at all. That's a good point. I wouldn't have brought that up. So that's a good point. All right, so let me just say that level 1, level 2 is really kind of death planning. I know that's a morbid statement, but it really is death planning because you're planning in the event that you pass away.
And that's absolutely true. And I think a lot of people avoid this because I don't want to deal with that. It's morbid. I don't want to deal with that. Okay, if you deal with it so that you don't have to worry about it anymore, it's in place. It actually, every client that I've ever gone through this process with says, I'm so glad we did it because now I don't have to worry about that anymore. Yeah. It's in place.
Right.
So it's a big stress relief to get through this process.
For sure. That is exactly right. All right. So now level 3, and by the way, if you do level 2, you automatically get level 1 is done.
Yeah, it's all built in.
Right. So every one of these sort of stair step on each other. All right. Level 3. Level 3 is what we call advanced planning. But it's accomplishing what you're doing in level 2, and then it adds a layer to it. So in level 2, we talked about probate avoidance, right? So we're going to avoid probate altogether. Again, arguments whether you should do that or not, beside the point. Number 2, it's about asset control. When you're gone, how do we protect your assets getting to who you want, when you want, how they want? Okay, that's how you get to determine that. This level 3, again, adds a layer on top of that, and it's about asset preservation. So now we're talking about when you're living, how do you protect assets while you're alive? This does not involve using a revocable trust or a revocable trust. It involves using an irrevocable or irrevocable trust, okay? Depending on how fancy you want to be today.
Being fancy.
Yeah, being fancy. All right, so it's a little bit unique, okay? We refer to this level 3 planning as elder care planning.
Right.
There's a lot of commercials. I'm starting to see a lot of commercials for elder care planning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
On TV. It's becoming more and more of a hot topic. I've been doing this for a number of years with clients, so I'm pretty familiar with it. Mm-hmm. I will say that the majority of advisors in town probably don't know hardly anything about it, if anything, because it is a unique sort of planning experience, and it's not for everybody. As Chris was saying earlier, this is not something you do when you're in your 40s.
No.
Or even in your 60s, I'd say. Unless some issues come up, then you might do it. But while we refer to this as elder care planning, you might also have referred to it as nursing home planning or Medicaid planning.
Yeah.
Medicaid planning. But in this scenario, the objective here is obviously probate avoidance, asset control when you're gone. But while you're alive, we're trying to preserve assets. So we do that by setting up an irrevocable trust or irrevocable trust, and you're taking assets and you're placing them into this trust, and you're essentially getting assets out of your estate so that in the event you become to the point to where you need full-time care in a nursing home,
extended care, long-term care, whatever.
Yeah, you're in a nursing home. You have the ability to preserve assets best you can to help with your care down the road. And so this is not for everybody.
No.
And even those that say, well, I can self-fund, because we hear that a lot. Well, I've got plenty of money, I can self-fund. You can still do this planning. It's almost like an insurance policy that you put in place to say, you know what, at least this asset, mainly a house, could be some other things too, but we're going to put them into this trust so that worst case scenario, you get to a situation where you need full-time care in your early 70s and your longevity, and I'm going to give an example in just a second, is really long, even though you need full-time care in the Alzheimer's, some kind of mental capacity, all those things. You can be healthy as a horse and just not be able to take care of yourself and need full-time care, right? So if that were the case, you're just preserving an asset so that you have money, so your money goes further than it would if you didn't do any planning. But all else stays the same. You're still getting probate avoidance. You're still getting asset control because you still control who gets it, when they get it, how they get it. We're just adding a little layer onto it that says asset preservation.
I'm gonna add to what you're just talking about and tee up something for you that I know you're really passionate about because we've talked about this. There is a misconception on the irrevocable trust planning that the only reason I'm doing this is to protect my assets. I'm trying to protect my house, my investments, things of this nature from the Medicaid spend down, which is true. It does those things. But there's another aspect to it that I think people just don't understand. I had this conversation with a family member over the weekend who is at an age where they should definitely be having this conversation. They'd never heard of it. Been working with their advisor for 30 years, had never heard of this process. It's the ability to use this to actually use the different laws to your advantage to pay for whatever care that you want. So I just teed that one up for you because I know that this is a big one for you.
And what direction did me go with that?
Okay. So you didn't see where I was going with that. So
I missed that one.
You've got the level 3 planning.
Mr. Producer, you should have written that on the board because I didn't know where he was going with that one.
You've got the level 3 planning in place now. You've done all that, and we know that when you have the irrevocable trust done, you have to get the wills, the power of attorneys, everything have to be done because the wording has to be exactly right.
Has to be Medicaid
You
compliant.
want a qualified attorney working on this kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, and that's a good point. So not
every attorney can do this.
Yeah, there's only a few attorneys. In fact, we have taken this to other attorneys, and they go, "That's not my game.
Nope.
You need to go see an attorney that specializes in."
Yeah, exactly.
It's called an asset protection trust, but that they specialize in that.
But
Now,
but
keep going.
from
Now-
there on, you
now
know where
I
I'm going with this, right?
Keep
Okay,
going
run
now.
with it. This is
No,
yours.
you keep going. I
Okay,
think I know
so
where you are.
the next part of this, you now got this in place, and something comes along. You used Alzheimer's or dementia or something like that as an example, and instead of being worried about losing your assets, you now, because the trust owns those assets, and that's the key here. You don't own anything; the trust does.
Right.
And you do have to have the family dynamic to pull this off. This is not for everybody.
Yep, that's right.
So now, because the trust owns everything, you qualify for Medicaid. So now you can claim Medicaid for your nursing home care, for example. But because I think Medicaid's paying $4,000 a month or something like that, max down somewhere in that area.
It includes Social Security and everything else.
Right.
They pay for about $4,000.
So you take the $4,000 or whatever it is, and you apply that to the nursing home that you want, which of course costs a lot more than $4,000. Now money can be taken out of that trust. There's a process to it.
Yep.
And you can't do it yourself. That's why family dynamic is important. And they can then supplement what Medicaid is paying to pay for the level of care that you want. And it's basically making yourself qualified for something that you typically would have too much money to qualify for.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the strategy that you use here.
Yeah.
Now you know where I was going.
Yeah.
with
Now
that.
I know where you're going when you start talking about that. Now, so here's the way I like to say it: is that if you think about you're in a nursing home and you get the basic sort of the Allegiant airline of the nursing home, right? So no frills. You're going to have a joint room, which no one wants.
Right.
And you have no bells and whistles. That's about $4,000 a month. That's about what Medicaid will provide somebody
Right.
when they're indigent, or is it indigent? I think that's the word.
I'm not sure.
Nah, anyway, means you don't have any money. Or in other words,
Broke.
Yeah, there you go. All right. So what happens is, you're in a nursing home, but you want the level of care that you want, let's say, is about $8,000
Right.
a month. Okay. So that's all the bells and whistles, single room, some luxuries that you particularly want. And that's where you want to, that's where you want to stay. All we're saying is that if you did this level 3, or let's say you didn't do the level 3, let's play that out, and it's $8,000 a month, you have to fund that till you're out of money.
Correct.
And then only at that point does Medicaid step in. And now you're having to go to the kids and saying, hey, kids, I want $8,000 a month in care. I
And the
get
kids are going,
I get basically the equivalent of $4,000. So
Right.
now the kids are having to fund the other $4,000 to keep mom or dad in a room with the amenities that they want. Now, flash forward, let's say you did the proper planning, and hopefully this never comes into play. The majority of people are never going to go into a nursing home.
Right. That's exactly right.
So it's just an insurance policy is all it is. You put this asset protection trust in place. Let's say you put the value of the home. Now all of a sudden you need care. The kids sell the home, let's say for $200,000, right?
Mm-hmm.
So now you go into care. You still want the $8,000 a month room. Medicaid will supply the first $4,000. It's about like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then the kids get to sell the home, and the value of that $200,000 they get for selling the home, they then can use to pay the other $4,000 of care that you want. Your assets are going to go a lot further
Yep.
if you've preserved assets than if you didn't preserve assets.
Correct.
That's the point behind it. Is it for everybody? No. Do we have some clients that are very, very wealthy that can totally fund themselves do it? Absolutely. And the reason being, it's an insurance policy. Worst case scenario, I can use it.
Right.
Best case scenario, I never need it. Right. But you're still getting the same estate plan done because you're still getting probate avoidance and you're getting asset control. Yep. You still get that doesn't go away. So it's kind of one of those conversations we have to say, look, if that's what you're trying to do, probate avoidance and asset control, why not consider when you're older, right? It's not somebody in their 50s. But when you get older,
Although I've seen one done for somebody in their 50s. That's the earliest I've ever seen.
The one you were showing me the other day, or
Yes.
maybe you were
Yeah,
talking
we were
about
talking
the other
about
day.
that
So, but if you
Unusual circumstance. on that one.
very unusual. But if you're at that point where you're having to revise your estate documents anyway, might be a conversation you might to have to see if it's something, because it's not that much different, honestly, to do the cost of your doing a full estate plan and doing the asset protection trust. Right. Not that big of a difference. So you might as well go ahead and do it and put a little insurance policy in place. Because honestly, if you do it, and let's say it costs you another $1,500 to do the asset protection trust, it's going to save you $4,000 month one.
Yeah, exactly.
Month one,
that's
if you
what I
go
was
there.
just thinking. So if Medicaid pays out $4,000 a month, how many months does it take before this process pays for itself?
Yeah, it's 1 month.
One.
Yeah, less than 1
Right.
month. Yeah.
So
anyway, I guess the point behind this was just to talk about the different levels of estate planning. Yes, there's documents in every one, but in every level, the documents get more complicated, right? And they have to be designed a particular way to basically accomplish what it is you're trying to accomplish. Level one, basic, just making
probate
sure.
avoidance, guardianship.
Yeah, guardianship, making sure you have the right beneficiaries on everything.
Right.
Number 2 is probate avoidance, and you can avoid probate altogether. And then the second part of that is asset control.
Right.
You get to say who gets your stuff, when they get it, how they get it. And I'm a big fan of lifetime trust planning, by the way.
Yeah.
I'm not a fan of giving money out at 30, 35, and 40. I've got lots of reasons to show you why I don't think that's a good idea. So if yours is set up that way, call me and say, what's the alternative? And I'll explain to you a million reasons why it makes more sense to do that. And then number 3, the only thing you're adding onto it is asset preservation.
Right.
And we call it an asset protection trust planning. So, or elder care planning, Medicaid planning comes to different, people phrase it differently. But anyway, that's it. So, we thought this would be a kind of a cool topic because we've not done a show on the 3 levels of estate planning. We briefly talked about it a little bit on the radio show years ago, but we didn't go into a ton of detail. Right. So anyway, if you have an interest, make sure you come see us. If you like what we talk about, subscribe and click the bell. I think that way you get notifications, right? And if you want our phone number, if you're listening and need our phone number, to call us 502-200-5210.
Wow.
I can't believe I got that
At the beginning and the end, you got it right.
How
I'm
about
impressed.
You can email us at info@fwppartners.com, or you can just go to the website and you can click on any of our pictures and send us an email. Send us, get in contact with us. There's a million ways to do that. So anyway, that's it for another week. Anything else? Any parting words?
No, that's... If you have not gone through some level of estate planning in the last couple of years, you need to get it out and review it. It's amazing to me how many people haven't looked at their estate documents in 20 or 30 years.
Yeah.
I promise you something's wrong. And I've found some crazy stuff. Please check this stuff and get in touch with a professional about it.
Yeah, we'd be happy to help you in that realm too. So anyway, thanks for watching. Make sure you tune in next week. We'll have another edition of Peace of Mind Radio Podcast. By the way, we have 2 other podcasts. One is called Connecting the Commonwealth. It's all about entrepreneurs and local business owners and local business service. So we don't focus on what we do. We focus on them. So if you are a business owner or an entrepreneur and you want to promote your product, service, whatever it is.
Love to talk to you.
Love to talk to you. Love you to come in. We can do a podcast with you. It'd be kind of cool to learn more about what you do. We also have another one, Burgers and Bourbon.
All right.
And just jumping all over my Burgers and Bourbon. It's one of our favorite, but we do review burgers and bourbon that's local here. So make sure you turn into those. So anyway, thanks for watching. Have an awesome week, and we'll see you guys next week.
The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, IFP Securities, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believed to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and/or legal advisor before implementing any tax and/or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and/or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors. This report may not be reproduced, distributed, or published by any person for any purpose without IFP's express prior written consent. Securities offered through IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as Independent Financial Partners, IFP, member of FINRA and SIPC. Investment advice offered through IFP Advisors, doing business as IFP, a registered investment advisor. IFP and Family Wealth Planning Partners are not affiliated. The information given herein is taken from sources that IFP Advisors, LLC, doing business as IFP, IFP Securities, LLC, doing business as IFP, and its advisors believe to be reliable, but it is not guaranteed by us as to accuracy or completeness. This is for informational purposes only, and in no event should be construed as an offer to sell or solicitation of an offer to buy any securities or products. Please consult your tax and/or legal advisor before implementing any tax and/or legal related strategies mentioned in this publication, as IFP does not provide tax and/or legal advice. Opinions expressed are subject to change without notice and do not take into account the particular investment objectives, financial situation, or needs of individual investors.